Hey folks, thanks for watching my monologues. In case you haven't heard, I'm told there's an election coming up pretty soon. In some areas, there's a lot of violence and civil unrest. If you're in the market for personal protection for yourself or your family, I'd encourage you to visit Guns Etc. Guns Etc. is 10,200 square feet, and they have product. And they're getting new product all the time. They'll work with you to get the exact type of protection that fits your needs. Stop by their store in Mesa or visit gunsetcetera.com, where you'll have access to over $400 million worth of firearms and accessories. And if you like my monologues, please subscribe to 960 The Patriots YouTube channel. Welcome back and happy October 7th, 2020. As you know, I've been talking a lot about the media and journalism lately. And I was thinking about it again last night watching the Martha McSally-Mark Kelly debate. I was struck when twice the main moderator, Ted Simons, asked Martha McSally if she agreed with Donald Trump's calling the you-know-what a hoax. And I was reminded again when CBS this morning interviewed 4 people denouncing Donald Trump for saying, "Don't let it dominate you." These interviews were family members of those who had contracted it. It got me to thinking a couple of things. First, the easy one. How hard would it have been to also interview a few people who agreed with the statement, "Don't let it dominate you"? I featured several of those statements or positions on this show. There's a lot of history and philosophy behind the notion of be not afraid. There are a lot of social and psychological and political thinkers and writers who think fear is not the right emotion for any healthy society. Think of Churchill's speeches during the Blitz of London as but one example. "Every man to his post" is what Churchill became famous for saying. For that matter, think of what Winston Churchill said of America when people warned it would collapse after the attack on Pearl Harbor. It's so great it's actually worth repeating here. He wrote, "Silly people, and there were many, might discount the force of the United States. Some said they were soft, others that they would never be united. They would fool around at a distance. They would never come to grips. They would never stand bloodletting. Their democracy and system of recurrent elections would paralyze their war effort. It would be just a vague blur on the horizon to friend or foe." Now, we should see the weakness of this numerous but remote, wealthy, and talkative people. But I had studied the American Civil War, fought out to the last desperate inch. American blood flowed in my veins. And I thought of a remark which Edward Grey had made to me more than 30 years before, that the United States is like a gigantic boiler. Once the fire is lighted under it, there is no limit to the power it can generate. Almost every U.S. president I can think of speaks to and invokes bravery in crisis, when crisis or attack comes. Indeed, journalists used to importune us to these convictions as well, especially after the 9/11 attacks and for about 15 years after, telling us not to be afraid of members of the Muslim religion, right? Islamophobia was a bad thing. Is a bad thing, isn't it? That's what we were told. It was a specter to be renounced and relieved of. And so we face something tough here. We're being told not to let it dominate our lives, not to put us in panic, not to instantiate fear. And of a sudden, all the emotions, all the martial emotions applicable in every other time of our history are to be condemned, with nary a word about what that sentiment might be either historically or beneficially. Is that journalism? Heck, I'm old enough to remember when journalists would do exactly what I'm lamenting the absence of, getting a historian on to talk about traditional and historical reactions to similar moments in time. You can just picture it, actually, can't you? Today, all journalism seems to have become is an appeal to grief and pity, an argumentum ad misericordiam. And it becomes something else, too. Report and convey falsehood if enough people believe it or should believe it. In other words, make something worse than it is or make something better than it is given the ideological realm of the values of the so-called journalist. Take last night's debate between McSally and Kelly. As I said, the host twice asked if McSally agreed with the president calling our current crisis a hoax. Now, if you're going to do that, you might want to do a little research, just a little, because not a month ago, when Joe Biden charged this, of all things, the AP fact-checked it to show Biden wrong. President Trump did no such thing. As the second sentence in the AP fact-check states verbatim, quote, in fact, Trump pronounced Democratic criticism of his response a hoax, close quote. Got it? He was doing what Joe Biden said yesterday and got a lot of positive attention for saying. Joe Biden said we should not politicize this. Okay. Despite his ads and statements to the contrary, fine, maybe he now means that. I don't know. But he received a lot of good press for that statement this morning. When Trump made the same point in the alleged hoax speech, that was his point too. For there, he said the Democrats were politicizing it, and their politicizing it by condemning his reaction was all based on a hoax. Their perception was a hoax. Their perception of his efforts were a hoax. That's what he said. Also known as a deceit or fabrication. Biden gets praised for the sentiment. Donald Trump gets condemned. And it's used as a wedge talking point by a moderator to go after a Republican in a Senate race in Arizona. Good work, Ted. But that's not the point. The point is a debate moderator twice tried to wedge it. Twice into a clearly partisan question and reification of President Trump's faulty statement that was not uttered. Is that the role of a moderator? Is that what a good moderator does? Is that journalism? Is any of this journalism? Is it journalism when Chris Wallace asks Donald Trump to do something new when he's already done it umpteen times, as he did with his question about denouncing white supremacists? To ask him, as Chris Wallace did at the debate, quote, are you willing tonight to condemn white supremacists and militia groups? That was the question. Is to ignore the several times Donald Trump already had and to try to impart to the viewing public that Trump had in fact not done so. It shows in Chris Wallace's case, as it does in Ted Simons's case, they either are partisan operatives doing the bidding of one side of the debate, which does not make them a moderator by definition, or they are simply uninformed and perhaps willfully so engaged in deliberate neglect of their first duty, knowing what the facts are. Is that journalism? The misportrayal of a fact for a political purpose or cause? Is that what a moderator does? Is that what journalists now do? Noam Chomsky would have called this manufacturing consent, as we spoke about yesterday. No, that is not the role of a journalist or a moderator. I'm not positive as to what the best or highest rated journalism school in America is today. I'd have thought maybe the Columbia School of Journalism or the University of Missouri, but a lot of websites point to the Medill School of Journalism at Northwestern as the highest rated. So I went to their website to see how they define what they are endowed to teach. It's interesting. It's not what you get from the journalist's creed that came out of the Missouri School about a century ago, posted at the National Press Club. It's not, as the creed says, among other things, quote, I believe that the public journal is a public trust, that all connected with it are, to the full measure of their responsibility, trustees for the public, that acceptance of a lesser service than the public service is betrayal of this trust. I believe that clear thinking and clear statement, accuracy, and fairness are fundamental to good journalism, close quote. Clear thinking, accuracy, and fairness, all fundamental. That's the journalist's creed. So I was a little surprised when I looked at the website at the Medill School at Northwestern, and I didn't have to go far. It's on its very front page of its website, it says, quote, we are training a new generation of multimedia journalists and integrated marketing communications professionals who are finding new ways to understand audiences and not only thriving in this exciting new landscape, but also helping to shape it, close quote. Aha. There it is. To shape it. To shape something is to change it, to bend it, to convert it. It reminded me of what Karl Marx said as his concept of history and philosophy when he wrote, the philosophers have only interpreted the world in various ways. The point is to change it. The point is to change it for the cause. Not in form, not accuracy, not fairness. Change, bend, persuade, and convert. Now I understand what I learned from ASU Cronkite School student Rayleigh Klein, the student who was fired from managing the school's radio station for linking to a story about Jacob Blake that was opposite the narrative of the left, or at least a different narrative, fact-based, but different from the dominant theme of our culture right now. What you might actually call news. You will recall I asked Rayleigh a week or so ago if the Cronkite School had courses in opinion or editorial journalism. I assumed slam dunk, of course. Every paper, all of radio, and most television has opinion columns, editorials, and guests. She said they don't. Now I see why. All journalism is evidently opinion and editorial. What else does one conclude from what we've seen this campaign year covered? The questions asked, the levels of interest in the candidates changing depending on the party. Or I guess I could have beaten up on Wallace and Simons and others. If you want, I could go further, but go to NBC. You see their latest? Lester Holt, their evening news anchor, moderated, there's that Orwellian term again, a town hall that he hosted with Joe Biden on Monday. All of the audience, the town hall, we were told by Mr. Holt, were undecided voters. That's how it was promoted. That's how it was introduced. Of the 16 questions asked from the audience, all but 3 were from self-described or previously identified Biden supporters. That would be 81% of the audience in the tank decided in what was advertised as a town hall with undecided voters. 81%. Got it? But not 100%. And that seems about the ratio of accuracy and fairness we have to become used to today. The words from the journalist's creed I've seen for some time now. 80% of it just isn't. Not in the sense of any universal understanding of the words accurate and fair. The Society of Professional Journalists really ought to just vote to take the creed down at the National Press Club. It clearly does not mean anything anymore. It's certainly not a statement of belief as the definition of creed is known. And while at it, maybe they ought to revise their first principles at the Society as well. You want to know what their first principle is? Quote, to seek truth and report it. Ethical journalism should be accurate and fair, close quote. If ethical means anything, if accurate means anything, if fair means anything anymore, all these rules need to be amended or emended. Or perhaps we just need a new dictionary and definition of what journalism is. Because guess what, folks? We don't have it here anymore. What we have is something much closer to screw tape. Do remember, you are there to fuddle him, he told his nephew. Good word, that, fuddle. Keep in mind next time you see someone claiming to be practicing journalism. We believe in self-government here still, don't we? Maybe we need to start thinking about self-journalism too. Just a thought. We believe in self-government, of course, as James Madison put it in the 39th Federalist paper, because it's the only way to preserve, quote, the genius of the people of America with the fundamental principles of the Revolution or with that honorable determination which animates every votary of freedom, close quote. Why then should we surrender the autonomy of trusting those who supposedly govern the governors, i.e., the press? Why should we trust them any more than we should fully trust the government, who they supposedly oversee on our behalf? On our behalf. That's what the government and the press have in common. They both work on our behalf. And we don't surrender fundamental freedoms to the government, so why should we surrender any kind of notion of freedom, especially freedom of thought, to their overseers? If we still believe in the genius of the American people and the fundamental principles of the Revolution and the votaries of freedom, as Madison put it, don't give more credence to so-called journalists than you do to the government. They don't deserve it and are no better. Indeed, they are worse, for they are not accountable to votes or remedies like impeachment when they engage in high crimes and misdemeanors. In fact, in giving credence at all, Keep in mind the journalists gave up their own creed long ago. They just didn't tell you. I'm Seth Leibson. We'll be right back.